Hello and welcome in. My name is Mark, aka the Markster. This is video number 30 in the FreeCAD series. Today I want to introduce you to a workbench called DynamicData. This is a sort of a replacement or an alternative for using spreadsheets to hold your variables. So let's first look at which version of FreeCAD that we're using, and we can go to the help about FreeCAD. Version 0.19, revision 19694 on Windows 10. It's also available here on the start page in the upper right corner. Alright, so let's create a new document. Now DynamicData is an installable add-on that you probably do not already have installed, but even if you do, you're going to want to update it to make sure you have the latest version, at least 1.75. I just made some changes to it earlier today, so you want to go ahead and get that updated. So go to the Tools menu, Add-on Manager, make sure you're in the Workbenches tab, and look for DynamicData. And you can click Install Update Selected. If you don't already have the latest version, it'll have an update available here, or just install update and that'll install it. You will need to restart FreeCAD after installing or updating. So you might want to pause the video and get FreeCAD restarted. Alright, now in order to access the toolbar, you need to switch to the workbench and the toolbar will appear. You also have the menu here. The only way to get to the settings is within the workbench in the menu. It's not on the toolbar. But once you have visited the workbench, the toolbar will follow you wherever you go. So if we go to the part workbench, look up here, a couple of seconds later the toolbar appears. So it's going to follow you wherever you go, whichever workbench you're in. You'll have the toolbar available. Right, it'll be there somewhere, no matter which workbench you're in. Unless you don't want that, then you can go into the settings, and we'll talk about the settings a little bit later. But I want to show you first what you can do with the workbench. So first thing we do is create a new object with this icon. And you get this icon, you get this object in a tree. It's a DD object. It has two properties already, label and DynamicData. And this will give you the version number that you currently have installed. It needs to be at least 1.75 as of this time anyway. By the time you watch the video, no telling what version it might be. So we have our DynamicData object. It's a container object for our dynamic properties. So we can add a property here. This would be akin to creating an alias in a spreadsheet. And we have the property types that you can choose from. We have the most recently used types here at the top, if you've used it already recently. Otherwise, go down through the list and select the property type. Most of the time it'll be a length property, which would use for length, height, width, radius, any sort of a length. You could also use a float, but a float is just a number, so it's not going to have the millimeters or inches or whatever units you're using. but you could you can see all the different types that are supported. Mostly it would be length, angle, length and angle mostly I think is what most people would be using. Sometimes float, sometimes integer. So we have length, and then we can choose our name for our property and a default value, which would be 0 if you don't choose one. So I'm just going to leave it at length. And notice you have a default group and you have the length property here. The name is prepended with DD automatically. So we can use that same trick that I've been using in the spreadsheets aliases with the ss.ss. So we can say dd.dd. So we can set the length property here of our cube to dd.dd and choose that length. So now we get an error because the default is 0 and you can't have a cube of length 0. So let's set this to 1, and notice now how we can interactively change the property of that cube here in the DD object, and we see the cube is set to that property. We have a parametric link to the property in the DD object. So one of the advantages, let me clear this error, one of the advantages of this over a spreadsheet, if you have it in a spreadsheet, then the sheet is going to cover the 3D view. It's going to occupy this view, and you cannot interactively see changes that you're making sort of in real time. You got to keep switching back and forth, and sometimes you might not be able to notice what the difference was if it's not real obvious. So we could create another object here, another length type, another property, and this one we can call height. We can set a value of say 12 and say OK. So now we have length and height properties. Of course they're not set yet in the cube, but we can do that as we've been doing and choose the height. So now we have our height property as well here. So we still have the advantage of consolidating all of our variables into one location as properties of this dynamic data property container object or DD object. And we've got them all here centrally located. Another way to create the property in the DD object, we can select both the cube and the DD. So we haven't done the width yet, so we can select them both. Select this copy set property, and we're going to copy a property from the cube to a new DD property. That's one of the options. We have also some options. We could set the value of the cube, set a value from cube to an existing property, or set a property from the DD object to an existing cube property. But what we want is that copy property from cube to new DD property, which is the default here. And we choose which of the properties we want to copy. And we could copy all, but we don't want all of these properties. So what we wanted was the width property. And it gives us a default name, DD width. We could accept that. And we'll choose to create a parametric link. So now we've got a new group here, copied from cube, the DD width property. And if we look at the cube, we see that the width has been already set as parametrically linked. And if we go to the dependency manager, dependency graph, we see that the DD object has the properties, and each of these properties are linked to the properties. Each of the cube properties are being linked to the same properties in the DD object. So now we can set or change all of these properties, the cube properties, from the DD object, which is just as easy to do it from the cube. But if you have a bunch of objects in your model, obviously you don't have to go hunting and pecking for your parameters. So having them all centrally located in one object here is a big advantage. So let's bring in a cylinder, and we can set our radius now. Create a radius property in the DD object by copying the existing property from the cylinder to the DD object, and we'll choose the radius property here, and we'll create the parametric link. So now the cylinder radius is linked to the property in the DD object, which is the radius, DD radius. So if we change the radius here, the radius of the cylinder changes. Now we might want, and if we're making this as a model, we might certainly want the cylinder and the cube height to be the same. And we already have the height property set up in the DD object. So here in the cylinder, we just click on the height. We enter dd.dd, and we choose that radius. I chose the wrong property, didn't I? Need to choose the height. Choose the height. Here we are. Alright, now we're the same. So now, when we change the height, both of those objects will change with it. So that, in a nutshell, is the dynamic data workbench. Now we do have some other options here. We can remove properties. So if I wanted to not have the radius in here, I could select the DD object, click this little remove property. You can remove all the objects if you want, although that would probably break these because they're linked to it. But we could remove one of these individually if we wanted to. So if I want to remove that radius, I can. This is broken now because it's still trying to link to it. So we got to be careful about removing them. Of course, you can clear. Go in here and clear it, and then that's what this clear button is for. It gets rid of the formula. Destroys the link. You can also remove the parametric links if you want to. So we see the cube is linked to the properties. We can go here and choose break existing parametric link of existing cube property. So we can break that width if we want to. I should probably set an option to break all the parametric links in there. And only list the ones that are, but not there yet. So now all these parametric links are broken. You can also remove all the properties if you want to from the DD object. So now they're all gone. This is not undoable. You cannot undo adding and removing properties. It's not built into the commit transaction engine. It was not anticipated. So that's not something that can be done or undone. We can break the link on this one as well. Or just click on it and break it manually. Let's go to the, well, first, let's look at creating a link to the properties. Copy property from cube to new DD property. Let's see which ones are available here. So we have visibility is true. We have the placement property we can copy. Let's make a copy of the placement. So now all the cube's placement properties, except for the axis, the axis too, everything is linked. And if you had to do all these links individually, that'd be a lot of tedium. So now we can change the placement here, and it gets reflected in that original object. So we can copy and set placement properties individually using a DD object. So let's say we have our cube in this location, and we would like to test it in multiple locations. So we can create a new copy of the placement. For this location, we'll call it maybe location 2. Let's choose that placement property again. Let's call this 2. So now in the DD object, we have a couple different placement properties. Placement and placement 2. And did I create parametric links? Yeah, it overwrote those, so I should not have created parametric links for the next one at all, actually. Let me remove all these. I'm going to delete that cube, create a new one. Get rid of this cylinder. Alright, let's try this again. So we create placement property by copying it. Let's call this placement 1. We're not going to create a parametric link. Simple non-parametric copy by value. And now let's move the cube. I'm just going to move it a few places, do some random rotating. Now let's copy this new property over to the DD object. And this will be placement 2. And we're just going to do it simple non-parametric. Okay, so now we have our two properties. We see one of them is at the default, it's all zeros, and the other is at this new location. So now let's move it some more. Creates another position. Just something random there. Now we have a third placement for it. Placement 3. And we're not going to create the parametric link. Alright. So now we have 3 different placements for this cube object. And we can set the cube to any of those 3 placements. So we copy property from, we set property is what we want, from DD to existing cube property. Okay, let's put it at the original placement 1. So I choose placement 1 and then the placement. And we're not going to create a parametric link. Let me put the axis across so we can see that it is back at the default location. So this is a handy way to remember locations where that cube was at and be able to set it back relatively easily. Let's put it back at the placement number 2 now. So we're going to set the property from the DD object to an existing cube property, which is the placement. And the one we're going to use is placement 2. And the top of the list is going to be the placement property of type placement. You have 2 in this object. In the cube object, you have the placement property and the attachment offset, which is also of type placement. So we don't want to change the offset. We want to change the placement. And we don't want to make the parametric link. So now the cube is back in that placement 2 position. If we want to go to placement 3, I know I'm getting repetitive here, but we choose set property from. So the difference between copying and setting. When you copy a property, you're making a copy of it in the DD object. So you're making a new DD property in the DD object. That's copying. Setting is setting an existing property to a value. And we want to set this value from the DD object to the cube's placement property, not from the cube to an existing property, at least not in this case. If we wanted to update placement 2, for example, that would be a way to do it. So we're going to set this back to what was the placement 3. And we're going to choose DD placement 3 here. And we'll set in the placement property. And we're not going to create the parametric link. So we can easily move this cube on those 3 placements, and we could have more than that if we wanted more. So there's one way you could have an assembly placement where your parts are all assembled, and then have one where it's sort of an exploded view. So you can see the individual parts. So that would be one use for that. We can also look at view properties in the View tab. Now these do not they do not have linkage to the expression engine, so we cannot set parametric color properties, for example. It's just not the expression engine. It's just not set, so you don't even have the low FX icon for any of these properties. But to enable that, you need to go to the workbench to get to the settings. And here we have different settings that are available. So do not keep toolbar active would prevent the toolbar from following you to your new workbench. These are the most recent type lists. When you create a new property, you have the most recently used types at the top. So this is the length of that list. I think the default is 5. And here's where you can support or not support view object properties. So if we support view object properties, now we can now we could copy a view object property from the cube to the DD object. So now we see, for example, we could choose a shape color and make a copy of that. And now in the DD object we have shape color as an option, as one of the properties. Now it's not going to be parametrically linked and there's no way to do it. But one use potentially would be you can name these colors something more meaningful, like let's say red or something. Let me add one here. We'll choose a color type, and I'm going to call this red. And I'll go here and I'll set it to red. So now I have a property in my DD object, which is a color type property, and I'm going to select both of these objects, and I'm going to choose copy. I'm going to choose set property from DD to existing cube property, and I'll choose the DD red, and it's going to be shape color, but I have some other options, point color or line color. And now my cube is red. So what I could do with the DD object is just make me a bunch of colors, and then I can access them by name and setting to the object. When you save your document, your DD object is saved with it. So you could have a special DD object just for the colors and have a bunch of these color properties in it, and then you would need to import that object into your document each time that you wanted to use it. But it cannot be parametrically linked, just not supported in FreeCAD for view property objects. So the advantage the advantage of supporting these view properties is you get access to them. But the disadvantage is now you have a lot more properties in the list that you have to select from, as opposed to only having to deal with these from here on up. And notice it says view object here. That's to let you see at a glance that this is a view object type and not a regular data type. And you have the option to cancel or copy all. If you copy all, you go through each one. I'm getting errors here because you cannot create these parametric links to these view types. But made a bunch of copies. Alright, so that's kind of an overview. You also have an option. Let me delete all these properties. Start over. You have that. Also have the options to import from a spreadsheet and also named constraints. So let's take a look at that. We go to the sketcher. Let's create a new sketch. I'm going to put a rectangle in here. We'll center it. Let me get rid of the axis cross. Alright. Now we'll create a width constraint. And we just give it a name. You have to have a name in order to be able to import it. And a height. We'll call this one height. Okay, and close it. So now we can, let me hide this cube. We can select our sketch and the DD object and choose import name constraints. Now this is going to modify your sketch. The sketch constraint will now be set. It will be linked parametrically to the DD object. Another potential gotcha in this, if you just have a simple number in there, then fine, it's going to work great. But if you had like the height was the width times 2, so that you were referring to the width, then what's going to happen is this only imports by numerical value. So that that width times height times 2 thing is not going to transfer over. So you would need to go in here and reconfigure that formula. So if it's a formula based thing referring to another property or another constraint or an alias or something, then the translation is not going to work. It's only going to take whatever that current value is. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. And why am I getting this error? Oh, because the cube. Oh, the cube's properties. So get rid of that. Clear this. Let's see what's in here. Okay, we now have DD sketch height and DD sketch width as our properties in the DD object. If we look at the dependency graph, we see that the sketch width constraint is linked to DD sketch width, and the height constraint is linked to this one. So if we change these properties here, we'll see the sketch is automatically reconfiguring itself. And of course, if you extrude it, these things will still apply. So it's a pretty quick and easy way to create your DD object properties. Just make them name constraints while you're creating your sketch, and then import them into the DD object afterwards. You can do the same thing with aliases. So let me just close this and restart with a different document. So if we had a spreadsheet with some aliases already in it, let's call this one width and height. We can make our aliases there. Alright, now we could make us a cube, and we'll link to those as we normally would. So have width and height. And we'll do the same for this height equals. So we have our aliases set up as we normally would. And if we want to import those aliases into a DD object, we can create us a DD object, select the spreadsheet and the DD object, and you see now the import from spreadsheet option comes up. And with the same admonitions, it's going to modify your spreadsheet, and this shows the dependency graph representation. So if it's a constraint, it'll be linked to the spreadsheet. In this case, it's a cube property. It'll be linked to the spreadsheet still, and the spreadsheet cell gets linked to the DD object. And the same problem can exist with formulas. So anytime you have references to another object, for example, you're referencing another alias, you're referencing some sort of a property, and you got some kind of a formula, like let's say it was a diameter property, and it equals 2 times b1, and maybe b1 was the radius, and you import your diameter alias into the DD object, it's going to give you whatever that current number is, and it's not going to link it to 2 times radius. So you would have to go into, after you do the import, you'd have to go into the DD object and set that up again as equals DD diameter times 2, or DD radius times 2, whichever way you were doing it. So now let's look at the alias. So it's now equals, the property is now equals DDSS width, which is that new name here. And we can change it. Let's change this one to let's say 9 and 8. And we'll look at the spreadsheet, and we'll see these properties have changed. So you don't want to delete the spreadsheet. It's still within that sort of chain. The cube is still linked to the spreadsheet. It's not linked directly to the DD object. The spreadsheet is linked to the DD object. Let's look at the dependency graph. And we see the spreadsheet is linked to the DD object, and the box cube is linked to the spreadsheet. So if you have an existing model and you wanted to use this tool with it, you could import those aliases into the DD object. But again, remember these formulas, if you have them set up like that, if it's anything other than just a number, you're going to have to go in and tweak this out a little bit. So the advantage here is we get to see the results immediately in our object without having to make your changes in here and then we'll look back and see if you can recognize what the differences were. Now you do not want to modify these in the spreadsheet anymore. You only want to modify them in the DD object, but you want to keep the spreadsheet object. So I think that's a pretty good rundown of the dynamic data tool workbench. Can't think of anything else I need to cover. When creating properties, oops, wrong button. In the top here, we had an old style of way of adding these properties in, and that's still supported. So that was the name. Let's call it new property, and then semicolon the group name. Let's call it new group, and the tooltip new tip, and then the value. You can have a default value, let's say 3.5, and hit OK. And now we'll see we have a new property at 3.5, and it's in the new group section. So that same type of input, if you prefer that type, if that's what you've been using, is still available. But I revised it to add this sort of custom form here, because I think it's just a lot easier for new users to enter the value and go to the group box, and if you want a tooltip, and instead of having to remember the syntax. But this is probably a little quicker if you're accustomed to entering your your new property values using that method. A recent change I made just today was to ensure that when we copy properties, so we haven't copied which one yet. Well, we don't have one yet for that. For the length, that would be the extrude. Okay, yeah. So if we copy the length to here, copy property from cube to new DD property, and we want this length property here. We'll let it use that default name. So in the old version, before 1.75, if you make it a parametric link, the DD object property would be parametrically linked to the cube, which is backwards from the way it should be. we want the cube to be linked to the DD object, not the other way around. So that was one change that I made. Another change is the default was make simple non-parametric copy, and now it's the default to create the parametric link. So those are the two differences. So now we have and it creates a special group named copy from. So we can see at a glance which object this length property was copied from. And when we import from the spreadsheet, the name of the group here is imported from SS. And if we import from that's not new for today, but if we import named constraints, it would have the same deal where you have the group name. Just put a circle out here and set a radius. So we'll name this radius. And we select our sketch and our DD object. We import the constraints. I don't know why this error is coming up. Let's see if it worked. Seems to be working fine, but it's giving me that error for some reason. I'll need to figure out what's going on there, but it looked like it worked. So we see in the DD object imported from sketch, but we also get the sketch name in the property name. So if we had another sketch, let's set diameter this time. Alright. And import from sketch 1 now. Yeah, again, I don't know why we're getting that error message. So now we have two groups, import from sketch, imported from sketch 001, and the property name has that sketch name in it. And it's a diameter property and not a radius. I'm gonna have to research what's going on with that. So probably, if I can figure it out, there'll be a 1.76 coming out. Look at the dependency graph now. You see the sketch 1 is linked to this diameter property. Sketch is linked to this radius property. The SS is linked to the object, and the box is linked to the SS here, but the length is linked directly to the DD object. So hopefully I've covered what I needed to cover on using this workbench. I thank you for watching, and as always, have a great day.